Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. I'm Fabiana Bacchini, Executive Director of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation. CPBF is a charitable organization, and our mission is to support and educate Canadian families of premature babies. This Premi Chat series is one of many initiatives we have to bring information for NICU families and healthcare professionals. Here every Friday, we talk with experts, researchers, and parents who share with us their experience and knowledge. Also on our website, canadianpremis.org, parents will find all kinds of resources and support. It's been almost 1 year since we launched the COVID Care program, offering therapy for families currently in the NICU and those recently discharged. To apply for the COVID Care program and watch the videos, visit the resource section. We are going to talk about LGBTQ plus in the US LGBTQ plus community members have been creating and planning their families for many years in all kinds of ways. Advances in fertility technology have provided people and couples of all genders and sexualities the opportunity to utilize assisted reproduction in their journeys. However, their experiences with healthcare professionals, NICU staff, and society can create barriers and further trauma and hardship due to the biases, prejudice, and stigma. Dr. Shah will talk about the current research project that aims to identify and describe the experiences and expectations of same-sex parents in regards to healthcare and to point out areas of improvement. And Aruna Boodram will share her experience as a queer, autonomous, single parent in the NICU who conceived her daughter through the IVF process. So I'm going to bring Dr. Shah and Aruna to the live session. And a short introduction. Dr. Vibhuti Shah is a neonatologist at Mount Sinai Hospital and professor in the Department of Paediatrics and Health Policy, Management and Evaluation at the University of Toronto. Her areas of research include neonatal and childhood procedural pain and family integrated care outcomes of preterm infants. And Aruna Boodram is a queer, cisgendered, community organizer and legal worker based in Toronto. She's the autonomous parent of Surya, a thriving and resilient 24-weeker who is now 10 months adjusted. Surya spent 3 months in 2 NICUs in Toronto. Aruna has been a community DJ and facilitator for years and believe in the beautiful possibilities that the two-spirit, queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities create and survive in every day. Aruna and Dr. Shah, thank you so much for joining us here today. I am so grateful that we are having this conversation. It's a very much needed conversation. And I'm so happy, Aruna, to have you here teaching what we need to know to move forward without stigma. So, Dr. Shah, I will start with you. I know you have a presentation for us to walk us through your research, and then Aruna is going to share her story, and we welcome all of you watching from your homes or from the hospital to ask questions and really engage in this conversation. We think is a very, very important conversation. So let's start with you, Dr. Shah.
Right. So can you hear me, Fabiana?
Yes, it's very good.
Okay, excellent. So first of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and present the research. And I can tell you, to be honest, I'm no expert in this field. And really the process or my interest really started when I was sent a manuscript from one of the neonatologists from Sunnybrook in looking at this field. And I thought, okay, well, what do I know about this community and their challenges? And that led to the research project. So really, this is a conversation. I'm here to learn as much from you guys as I have learned from reviewing the literature and hopefully our research project. So next slide, please. So I think, as Fabiana said, advances in fertility technology has allowed same-sex couples to have infants through different modes, IVF pregnancy or in vitro, pregnancies or surrogacy for gay couples. And that's fantastic that this opportunity is now available. And if you look in Canada, actually the number of same-sex couples who are now embarking or becoming parents is 12%. That's the data from 2016, which was compared to only 9%, approximately 9% in 2001. So it's increased by more than 1/3 of the parents, same-sex couples are embarking on being parents, which is great. So based on the literature, we do know that same-sex parents do face some biases and prejudice, not only from the society, but also from the healthcare professionals, possibly. And I think we need to be reflective of what are your needs and what can we do to improve your experiences, not only in the NICU, but again, throughout the lifespan of these children. So I think that's where my interest really started in saying, what can we do? And when I think about, I've been in the NICU as a consultant for more than 20 years, and then thinking about it, I don't see or experience or have experience with couples as more commonly with heterosexual couples, right? So the number of experiences and few and far, which also makes us important for us to learn what we can do. Next slide, please. As I said, some infants of same-sex parents need an NICU admission, which also adds added stress. Being in the NICU, which is a very chaotic environment, very stressful, you're learning to work with different individuals in the NICU is very stressful, no matter whether you are a heterosexual couple or same-sex parents. But now having that other being in this community also adds increased stress. And I think it's complex. There are the legalities and parties involved if there is surrogacy. How do you define the parenting role of same-sex couples? And I know that surrogacy and all that is quite expensive, including IVF pregnancies could be expensive. So those are added stresses that this community faces. So I'm trying to learn from this research project, what are the things that they experience and what can we do to facilitate and reduce the stress. So they do have, provide unique medical context for us to say what are their expectations of the infant's outcome. Next slide, please. So when I went back, and after that paper, when I went back and looked at the literature, in fact, there is no data regarding experiences of same-sex parents who had their infants admitted to the NICU, which was very interesting. And I think that because of the unique context and expectations, I think we need to provide care and counseling in a much more sensitive and individualized fashion. So that's what I thought we need to learn. The healthcare providers should also understand the couple's context, bedside manners, how do we communicate with you, and interactions with the healthcare professional team and this community. So that was the whole rationale for me to embark on this study, which has taught me a lot over time. So we also, next slide, please. So the study is titled Experiences of Same-Sex Parents Having Preterm Infants Admitted to the NICU in Canada. Initially, we started this project as only including NICUs from Sunnybrook and Mount Sinai Hospital, but we've realized over time that we have limited number of participants admitted with same-sex parents who have babies in the NICU. So that was one of my struggles. And so we decided that we would include this across NICU because as parents, being in the NICU probably potentially could have the same experience. Next slide, please. So our objectives were to see what are the expectations and experiences of same-sex parents in regarding medical care, information sharing and counseling process, and what suggestions and recommendations would you guys tell us to say how we can do better in our job, because I think it's you guys who put trust in us as having your babies in the NICU, and what can we do? You motivate us to do things better. So we really need to learn from this community to say what can we do to reduce the stress of having a baby in the NICU. Next slide. So basically, it's what's called, we use what we call a qualitative research methodology, and the term that we use is what we call descriptive phenomenology. That can be used in any any context where you want to learn the individual's experience. So there is no prejudice, there is no bias. We just want you guys to describe what your experiences were of having a baby in the NICU. Obviously, as I said before, we wanted to include same-sex parents whose infants were admitted into the NICU. We plan to include babies less than 35 weeks gestation, and we wanted to ensure that you guys had at least a week's experience of being admitted to the NICU. And initially, we had started with, saying the admission was within the last 3 years, but I've recognized the challenges of identifying participants. So we've extended over the last 5 years, because over 5 years, things may have changed in your life. You may have had other children, and that may have also, defined your experiences differently. We did exclude transgender couple to begin with. And as I said, we are doing this study for participants across Canada. Next slide, please. So I didn't want to present. Maybe I'm going to stop here, basically. So what I'm going to say is that so far we have interviewed two couples, lesbian couples, who have given us some information. Our plan was to include participants, both lesbian couples and gay couples, to be part of our study. We really want around 6 to 15 participants per couple. The way this methodology works is that every time we interview a couple, we record there. So we use what we call a semi-structured interview guide. We have open-ended questions. And depending on the responses, we can further elaborate. We recognize it is a sensitive process, and if a couple refuses to answer a question, we would move on to the next question. And then every time once we've done the interview, we'll transcribe the interview. We'll make some, we do an analysis, what we call thematic analysis, to say, what are the things that were really important to this couple, and what are the things we need to explore further? And I'm just going to tell you, based on the 2 interviews that we've done, this were the 4 themes that have really come up to us and say that you guys as a couple, when you embark on a pregnancy, it's really an invested pregnancy. You have the desire to have babies. You are embarking on a process of artificial reproductive technologies or surrogacy to go through that process. I think we need to learn and think about the roles beyond the heteronormative or mother and a father role versus the role of the same-sex couple as they have defined. I think stigmatization is one of the things that did come up. And I think for any parent, whether it's a heterosexual couple or a same-sex parent, I think we did learn from the 2 interviews that the experiences were really similar. You found the environment very stressful, the information setting. So that's no different for any individual. So those were the big themes that have come up. I'm now going to share the next few slides in detail because I don't want you guys to bias, but really what I hope that following this presentation, and maybe Fabiana will share later my contact information, we would really like to have participants who would be willing to take part in our study so that we really can explore further in details what are the things that are important and hopefully, teach. And one of the examples that I would say is that how do bedside nurses and physicians, for example, including me, how do we interact with you? There is the curiosity, there is, as individuals or human beings. So those are the big themes that we really want to explore. So Fabiana, I'm going to stop here because this is what I wanted to share. And maybe at the end, you could share my email address to say, and really this is a conversation because I'm here as much to learn from you guys because my exposure is also limited. I know Aruna is sharing her experiences. I think how do we interact and what can we do? No parent wants to come into the NICU unless they have a baby that really needs, right? So you guys motivate me to do things better. And so what can we do for this community to feel that the experience is better, not only medically, but also as human beings?
Absolutely. Dr. Shah, thank you so much for sharing your research with us. I do hope you can recruit many parents across the country. And I think connect with the community is a great start. I think Aruna has a lot of connections that can help us out and maybe find more parents to engage in this research that we think is very important. So Aruna, I would like to bring you to this conversation and have you sharing your experience with us in the NICU. Last year you presented in our Preemie Health Talks and you talk about your beautiful daughter. And I ask you, why do you define yourself as an autonomous parent versus a single parent? And I think just starting with that, it is a very good way for us to really understand and use the right terminology and address people properly in the NICU.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Dr. Shah, for your presentation. It was interesting to see on the other end of how people understand our community. So especially from a medical professional lens, that was really interesting to hear. So thank you for your work. And yeah, so I identify as an autonomous parent because I am a single parent. I guess I'd be also known as a single parent by choice. So I am a queer person who decided to have a child on my own completely. And I think that was also, it's another layer, I think, of having an IVF pregnancy as a queer person and then as a single person. That was also like those layers of how I was interacted with in the NICU also came up a lot, because people were like, but you had IVF pregnancy. Why did you choose to have a baby on your own, right? Because, most single parents, sometimes, most of the time it's, not by choice, or they get pregnant by accident if it's someone who has access to sperm or is having sex with someone with sperm. And so it was really interesting having to have those conversations with multiple people, both inside the NICU and inside family rooms. Sometimes people be like, wait, so you did IVF on purpose by yourself? So yeah, a lot of like just not knowing what to do with that information. So yeah, so that's what I mean by autonomous, is that it's a by choice parenting by myself. Whether or not I'm in partnerships with people for myself, that I'm still the sole parent of Surya. And so that's understood. That's how I understand my parenting.
That's wonderful. Share with us a little bit, how was your journey in the NICU? You mentioned that you had experience in 2 different hospitals. Would you like to hear your experience a little bit?
Yeah, so I was at Sunnybrook and then afterwards at Humber River. So I was in the level 3 NICU at Sunnybrook, and then we were transferred to level 2 because Surya was an interesting journey throughout the NICU. She's a 24-weeker, so she was born at 24 and 4 at 610 grams. And we were discharged from Humber at 36 weeks gestation. So she was off all oxygen, she was feeding, she was doing what she needed to do. And so, yeah, when I was in the hospital at Sunnybrook, Sunnybrook's great and they have really good training. They have a lot of awesome people who work there. The nursing staff are absolutely incredible. And I will say have saved my life multiple nights when I was staying at the NICU. I spent the time at Sunnybrook, I slept in the room with her for the 3 months. So I never left. So I became kind of part of the NICU in this really interesting way where the nurses really knew everything about me. Literally, like, they knew that I snore at night. They knew that, like, my friends would come and they knew my schedule. They knew if I had clean sheets. Like, it became like this very intimate relationship with the nursing staff at Sunnybrook, and they were incredible about it. They didn't believe me when I said I wasn't going to leave. And then eventually by, I think, week 4 or 5, they're like, okay, she's not going anywhere. So I want to also say that my experience is unique in a variety of ways. It's also privileged in a lot of ways. I also think that my experience is one of many, but also it's different than someone that is a trans person or is not cisgendered. I have cisgender privilege in that, like, I am able to walk through the world and also still kind of identify as a mom. And when people call me a mom, I don't feel issues with that, but that is not the case for many different queer and trans and gender variant people. So I just want to start that off by saying that, like, my experience is one of a very cisgendered experience, and that will also alter and change my experience as opposed to someone who was a trans parent in a NICU space. And there are many trans parents, and there are many gender variant parents as well. So Just wanted to put that out there. But my experience was that I had to have conversations multiple times with some staff at Sunnybrook and at Humber River around my family structure and my family situation. So, always assuming that there's two parents. There's not always just two parents. There are multiple parents, and actually in Ontario, you can have up to 5 people on a birth certificate. So that could mean 5 people identifying as parents, right? And that is a direct result of the advocacy and organizing in the LGBTQ community. The reason why people were able to imagine families that have multiple people taking care of one person is a direct result of advocacy from the LGBTQ community, and specifically people at Sherbourne Health Center. And so I think that there's a lot of ways that people didn't really understand that I was a single parent, I was queer, and that my support team, or the people who were going to be in Surya's life, were not going to be an intimate partner of mine, or a father, or even a partner. They were going to be my mom. They were going to be my sister. They were going to be my best friend. They were going to be people and they were always going to change, right? Because my team was actually very large. And the thing about LGBTQ community, and particularly ones that don't kind of fit into this cisgendered or more heteronormative structure of like even 2 moms or 2 dads, is that we are able to create community, and we have to create community in order to raise the families that we have, right? So it's a very different structure than even like, 2 lesbians who are probably upper middle class, or 2 gay men who have a lot of privilege in that kind of way. And so it's a different thing in terms of also what you have access to in terms of class and race, right? So also, I'm not a Black or Indigenous person. So my experience also is very different than friends of mine who have experienced the medical system as a Black or Indigenous person, and queer and trans and whatever else is going on for them. So I think that there's lots of different intersectional ways that people experience the NICU that can be harmful. I remember when I was in NICU, there was an Indigenous family there who was a heteronormative Indigenous family. And I remember like they had to jump through a lot more hoops than even I did, right? So even in that kind of way of thinking around the privilege that I did have, in terms of my experience, I did have to mention multiple times that, there's no father. And then when they would ask about, this was, I think, the lactation consultants or something around like allergies, they were like, well, we can know about allergies if you tell us what the father is allergic to, and like, there's no father. And I had to repeat that over and over and over again. So this kind of reimagining, it takes creativity, right? When we're supposed to question very medical ideas of silos of how we understand human beings or families to function, I think it really needs some kind of creativity of understanding that we actually know nothing about this person until they tell us about themselves, right? So unless I tell you that there's a father, there's no father. Unless I tell you that I have a partner, there's no partner. Unless I tell you that this person is there and they're going to be there and this is the other parent, then you don't know that, right? You don't know who this person is. And I really appreciated that staff did ask me, so who is this person in Surya's life? And how would you like us to address you as in Surya's care? So that was a question that really I appreciated, and I was able to support staff also at Sunnybrook and at Humber to kind of think through how I would want to be addressed in the NICU setting, and that was really helpful. So that was a long-winded answer, but
no, that is wonderful, Aruna, because I think you cover a lot of issues and things that we need to address. But Dr. Vibhuti, you have a question coming here about your research, and I'm going to share the screen. Why did you exclude the trans parents?
So the reason we excluded is I think I'm still learning. I don't think that, we wanted to, and we didn't know how many participants would be, but I'm happy to include them actually, because we want to be more overarching and include all of the members of the community, but it was complex. And so I was just doing baby steps to say, what can I understand really even with same-sex couples? So absolutely, I don't think that was the reason. It's just because, as I honestly said, I've embarked on this journey because of one paper that was sent to me, and then it really reflective of it and thinking, okay, how do I do? And as Aruna said, I did make some notes of what she said, curiosity. every human being in the NICU is very curious to know what's different and why do we have to repeat this multiple times, right? For a parent. And, if we had it right up front, if you knew this and say, okay, well, these are the rules of engagement in that sense, then you would not have to repeat it, because you said you meet the physicians, you meet respiratory therapists, you meet dietitians, right? And you have to, I don't like the word justify, but you have to clarify every time that this is what it is. And then we have our own prejudged biases or our own personal biases that may be also influencing. So that was the only reason. This is baby steps, but this is where I'm really hoping that today's presentation will lead this community to come forward and help me to progress this research.
And we are very grateful that you did take this initiative, because you said there is no data, so there's not many people looking into this, and how can we make things better? Because in Canada, we are evidence-based healthcare system. So if you don't have the data, how can we make changes and systematic changes? Because it's not only an NICU change, we want them all to embrace and understand. So I think my question to you is, because you work in one of the biggest NICUs in Canada with a lot of diversity. We are in Toronto. We have people from all over the world, all different cultures, religions, and sex orientation. So how can we continue to educate healthcare professionals to deliver those messages of inclusion?
So there are multiple ways, right? So it's not only one physician group. I think each of these individuals, each groups need to be educated. And I can tell you, we go through so many trainees who come from other parts of the world. They probably haven't heard about some terminologies. They don't know. They are shocked, right, to interact with this. So I think that being part of their educational, like this should be a component of education, because the goal is to make respect as an individual, that person, make their lives less stressful. And so I think that once we know what are the things we want to change based on our study, this is, as I said, the first step, right? To say, and then say, how can we modify and educate and create some educational model of how to interact? I mean, it's like, how do we break bad news to a family, right? We need to teach, right? So it's no different to say, how can I, or how do I converse with a parent who is already stressed, who's in the NICU, but, not going through this. I mean, as Aruna said, you are happy to be called mom, but some of the lesbian couples, there could be a question saying, who's the mom? The mom's just delivered, right? That's how we reflect in our mind and we think, but that's not true, because both of the partners can be moms, right? But the moms is still admitted she's just delivered. So who are you? Rather than having that, if we knew this ahead of time, maybe we need to change our interactions and our questioning, right? And be more warming and be have a better welcoming of this couple in the NICU, right?
Yeah, and I actually also stems from, right? Like from the very beginning, from the very jump, are you asking those questions around, like, how do you guys identify? What are your pronouns? What are, like, those are the questions that could be useful in even kind of determining. Obviously, I mean, for myself, like, those are the questions that you probably won't get to until later on. I was admitted at 19 weeks and then I went into preterm labor. So, I mean, if someone asked me my pronouns in that moment, I'd be like, oh my God, that's not even important. But I think that at some point, if someone asked me, like, what is your family structure? How would you like to be identified as? Do you identify as mom? Like, what is your title? Also, I think it's really important to think about how a lot of this work and a lot of the structure around, I know you're just starting off in this research, but a lot of it is very cisnormative, right? And so I think what happens when we even consider the fact that, like, only moms or female bodies can give birth, that's just not true, right? And I think that, there's like a lot of men who give birth and trans folk who give birth who don't identify at all with female or male or whatever gender they choose to identify as. And I think that's really important to consider, because those are the folks that also, I can't even imagine being a trans person in the NICU and how often that conversation would have to happen over and over and over again, right? And that is, at the NICU, I can't even like begin to talk about how traumatizing it was without breaking down. And then I can't even imagine the layers upon having to remind people who you are as a trans person over and over again, right? So the trauma is just double fold when you have trans community come in and then you are consistently having to explain yourself and who you are and who your family is. And also, like, families don't have to look like two parents. They're also not in couples. So I think I actually don't qualify for your research study because I don't qualify. I'm not in a couple. I'm also don't identify as lesbian, and I'm a queer person who is a single person. And so even I couldn't even do your research, and I really wanted to be a part of the project. So I think that in of itself is where the gaps are falling, because we're also not talking. We're talking to a very particular kind of LGBTQ people, right? And that's a very like heteronormative and upper, like it's a very class-based thing as well. I also wanted to point out that LGBTQ people and Two-Spirit people have been making babies in all kinds of ways outside of assisted reproduction forever, right? We have been figuring out how to have babies beyond having a person with sperm and a person with egg come together and do that. We've been figuring out donor stuff for a long time. And so I think that that's also something to consider, is we've always had to be creative before we were identified as like, okay to have babies, or okay to create our families. We've been creating families in different ways for a long time. And we can also look at the way that Two-Spirit family kinship has really been something that they've done in different kinds of ways. I know lots of Two-Spirit families who have taken in other family members, and those are their children, or they figured out how to like take care of each other's children, or gotten donors from different places. And so I think that like there's a lot of assumptions around how families are created that is also based in like a very particular, like, you have to have IVF or IUIs or go through assisted reproduction to have a family, when really that's one very small part of how queer community and LGBT community has been doing it. So it's just a little something to think about in terms of how people come together and make families.
Yeah. Right. Sorry. So great thoughts, Aruna. One of the things that I was thinking about while you were talking is that, we should already actually know ahead of time. And as you said, you had ruptured your membranes, if I understood, 19 weeks, and then you ended up delivery. So we knew you were in the hospital. You were already identified, and having that communication between the teams, right? Because the neonatal team was going to meet you at some stage.
Of course, yeah.
Right? And having social workers who are really integral part of our team as well, because they help us understand parents better as well, would also be a good conduit to help us as clinicians and healthcare providers to do better. So I think that there's many things, and I think that when I was thinking about my medical schooling, I never had any education about this, right? And would it be that it should be right from its inception as trainees, whether you're training to be a nurse, whether you're training to be a physician, right? That you may meet people with different, opinions and perceptions and diversity, right? No different than, we are celebrating the Black History Month, right? For example, this month. So nothing, but I think being respectful of each other and, understanding would also make it easier, right? Because as you said, you have to repeat your same story so many times. Why is that?
Yeah. And also just thinking about how it's that repeating is also because, it happens all the time, whether or not you're queer, you have to like remind people over and over. But I think it's easier for people to understand in our society when you have like man, woman has baby, and then these are the parents. It's harder when you have like multiple people's name on that board, right? Or with the parents' names, or my emergency contacts were like two of my sisters and my mom, and then I had to fight to get all three of them to come with me to the infant CPR course, because they were like, well, it's only two people, right? Right. I'm like, but there's going to be three of us taking care of this child, and I don't know who's going to be left alone with her and need to know the CPR. Like even little things like that, having to make choices around who is going to be considered the guardian or care person, and I wonder how that also would function with one of the a queer family or LGBTQ family who has up to like 5 people as legal guardians. Like, what would that even look like in the NICU, right? And are they prepared for that? What would that look like for how they support that family to all feel connected and part of the NICU process? Because so much of the NICU process is about trying to feel connected to your baby, because this and the grief that comes with not being able to do it in the way that we were supposed to, you know, that we should have had to, or we could have had to, or what we imagined in that time. So, yeah, and I think that like there's a lot of work to be done in terms of supporting trans families in particular, that are racialized and that are Indigenous in particular.
Absolutely. We can say there's so much work to be done still in this area. And we have a comment here, calling people by their names a great start rather than assuming mom and dad. And I have to agree with that, because I have a husband, I had a father in the NICU with me, and a lot of times people just call me mom. I don't like people address me as mom. I want to be called by my first name, and every time my son has a readmission in hospital, I want to be called my first name, because I feel I don't want to be called mom, because I'm not their mom, I'm my son's mom. And I feel like even for this community, like, just ask how you want to be called in this scenario. Like, okay, my first name is in the whiteboard, so that's how I want to be addressed. And I think that applies to everyone, really. But Dr. Shah, any final thoughts? Because our time is up, but I will want to bring you both back, because I think this is just a scratch on the surface for this topic. And I think there's a much more to explore and learn. And how can we work with teams to really change the stigma and receive everyone with broken hearts in the NICU, especially during a very traumatic time of their lives?
Right. So I was just going. So Aruna, first of all, thank you for sharing your experiences. I think you've given me so much food for thought, you know, to reflect on things that we probably didn't think. And I understand that we should extend it to the queer and the transgender. And I think, as I said, it was baby steps for me, because I'm trying to understand and ensuring that, you know, it is individualized, it is sensitive, right? You know, so what I'm hoping is that by this conversation today, I'm really hoping that I will get emails for participants. If Fabiana, if you're willing to share my last slide with my email address, or you can Google me and you will find I'm based at Mount Sinai Hospital in Toronto. I'm really looking for feedback from you guys, because unless I get that information, we cannot move forward. As I said, we only have so far 2 participants, but I'm really looking forward. And then Aruna, we can definitely keep in touch with Fabiana and as a group, because our goal is to, you know, research is only one aspect of my work, but clinical care takes precedence over research. And if we can do the right things for the family, that is the most critical thing to me.
So I will leave you on the comments, and I just want to share this comment from Lindsay. Thanks for speaking. We participated in this study, and we shared a lot of feedback. Looking forward to seeing what changes occur from this study. So thank you, Lindsay, for joining us here today. And we have a question here from Michelle from Vancouver. Are there parents involved in the research side, for example, in creating the questions for surveys, etc.?
So we had piloted the questionnaire or the interview guide with parents to make sure that we were addressing the questions they think were important. So yes, we had piloted it with parents, because we totally recognize that, you know, anything that we do is sensitive and it has to be individualized. But and then every time when we do one interview, we've tried to say, okay, what should we explore further based on the responses that we've received it for. Totally. And if you know anybody, please come forward so that we can do a better job.
Absolutely. Any final from you, any final messages from the clinicians watching us here today, or parents who want to get engaged in research? No, you're mute. Hold on. Okay, can you unmute yourself? Okay,
yeah.
There you go.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I think that there's so much work that's already been done and also being done, and also the community is huge, right? And so you also have to consider the ways that I think there's really important things to consider in terms of the ways that like racialized people experience things very differently than white folks, and then also in terms of class and what that looks like, and background, and all the things that come with, you know, every kind of experience of people. But in particular, I think it's important for clinicians and for studies like this to consider the gaps are very detrimental, right? Because I think also what research does is it also allows for funding to happen. It creates these opportunities further. And then when we don't address folks like queer people or transgender people, or think about the ways that like race and class are also incorporated in that, it kind of does a disservice sometimes, right? And I think that there's a lot of opportunity here. And so I think that, and there's also lots of folks who have lots of experience. I know lots of trans parents who were in the NICU, and someone was supposed to be on this call. Hopefully next time we can get them. But you know, there's lots of trans and queer people who are having babies all the time, that are, and more of them are experiencing either the NICU or have had experience with a hard childbirth or things like that, right? And so just thinking about the reaching out to resources that already exist. I know like the Sherborne Health Center has lots of information that they've done on family planning and queer and trans communities. And then also, you know, there's lots of people who have been doing this work outside of the main university network. So thinking about how we can also like tap into the work that's already been done, because as I said, we've been doing this for a long time, right? So this stuff is not new to us. We've figured out ways to family plan and create our community, our family in the ways that we've wanted to, and we've been here. And so, yeah, I'm excited to see where this goes forward from. And yeah, I think the main lesson that I can offer to people is to not make any assumptions. Any assumptions you have about a family walking into the NICU or into your practice, just leave it at the door. You know, don't assume who the mom is or the dad, even if they look like the straightest, most normative couple. You have no idea what's happening until they tell you. And so not making assumptions about people. And I mean, as Fabiana even pointed out, even in her situation, like, you know, it's not an assumption that everyone wants to be called mom or that mom is the appropriate name to be naming someone. So just literally stop assuming who you think is the donor, who's created the egg, who gave birth. A lot of times for trans friends of mine, they always assume that the person who looks more female, whatever that means, has given birth. When really it wasn't. It was the trans masculine person that gave birth to the baby, right? In the couple. So there's just so many ways that babies can come into our lives, and so to not make assumptions is, I think, the best thing that we can go forward with.
Absolutely. I want to thank you so much for sharing your experience with us, for educating us, because I think we need the education so we can make the changes. And Dr. Shah, thank you so much for your work. I applaud you for taking this initiative. You are one of a kind in Canada, and I'm so grateful to know you and to have you in our Primi Chats today. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabian. And as I said, research is only one component, but even if you want to share for other into how to improve clinical care and you don't want to be part of research, you are welcome, because I think that's what we need, as Aruna said. And Aruna will communicate and we'll see how we can extend beyond the same-sex couples.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you. And I want to thank you everyone for watching us here today from YouTube or our Facebook channels. And I know we have people from many other places in the country and other countries. And I really want to thank you for joining us. And this is a very important conversation. And the video of today's session and all the videos from our live series are available on the CPBF website, which is right here, canadianprimis.org. We are a charitable organization, and we believe that through education and support, we can empower families, ensuring they are ready to care for their babies at home. Visit our website, consider making a donation. Together, we can create a brighter future for all families. I will see you again next Friday, and happy long weekend if you're in Canada. I see you next Friday. Thank you.